Many governments assess so-called sin taxes on items such as alcohol and tobacco. Do these taxes represent good public policy? A recent panel discussion tackled that topic. The event was co-hosted by the John Locke Foundation, Western Carolina University's Center for the Study of Free Enterprise, and the Federalist Society. And we're interviewing panelists to get their take on this issue and related topics. In this segment, we welcome Dr. Craig Depken, professor of economics at UNC-Charlotte. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
You are an author of one of the chapters in a book that's on this subject, For Your Own Good, Taxes, Paternalism, and Fiscal Discrimination in the 21st Century. And your chapter deals not necessarily so much with sin taxes per se, whether they're good or not, but more the whole idea of subsidies of sports stadiums and the selective taxes used to deal with that. Is that correct?
Correct, right.
So tell us a little bit about these sports stadiums and how taxation fits in with them.
Well, I think most of us would be familiar with the publicly funded stadiums. Historically, this was very common that a city would build a stadium hosting any number of events. Could be professional sports, motocross, soccer, things like that. Over the past 25, 30 years, stadiums have become much more selective and much more specialized. So we have single-purpose stadiums instead of multi-purpose stadiums. And at the same time, the expenditure on these stadiums has increased dramatically. So a stadium that used to cost $30 million back in the 60s now would cost almost $1 billion. And some of that is because of construction costs and labor unions and whatnot. That's fine. But a lot of it is because of the fancy suites and other opening roofs and things like that. So what we talk about in our chapter is how are these stadiums going to be financed? So there's two choices. One would be that it would be financed by the team owner or by the league, some private entity, or the public will provide money for this. Over the past, say, 25, 30 years, the public has provided substantial amounts, maybe more than $1 billion towards stadium construction across the country. And how do these particular expenditures financed? And so there are plenty of ways that economists could talk about how we would finance these stadiums, but we know what the politicians do. They choose sales taxes. They might choose hotel taxes, choose car rental taxes. And the idea here is that with the sales tax is a broad base, and so the sales tax doesn't have to be very high, but because everybody's being charged a quarter of a penny every time, eventually the stadium will be paid for. When it comes to the hotel taxes and car rental taxes, the typical story is that, well, those are outsiders that are coming in, and we'll tax those people that come in for tourism, and either for the events or for other reasons that they're coming in. And what we talk about in our chapter is that this is fine, you can charge a hotel tax, but the question is who's actually paying that tax, not the individual who has the tax paid on their credit card or whatever, but who's actually bearing the burden of that tax. And if you think about a tax that is actually binding so that people change their behaviors, then in the case of a hotel tax, fewer hotel rooms would be rented out because the tax has increased the cost of a hotel room. Maybe not the person who's coming to, say, Charlotte for a Panthers game, they're going to come regardless, but there might be other decision makers who say, well, we could have our conference, say we're the local dentist association, we could have a conference here in Charlotte, but we could also have it in Asheville instead. And Asheville doesn't have the same tax as Charlotte. So I'll move the conference from Charlotte to Asheville. That means fewer rooms are rented in Charlotte because of this tax. Now it's hard to tell because we didn't see that, right? They didn't show up in Charlotte, so we didn't know that this happened, and it's probably not advertised in the paper that the dentists are not coming to Charlotte. But the real problem is that, from the economist's point of view, is that if there are fewer rooms being rented in Charlotte or any other city that imposes these taxes, then that means there are fewer people going to be hired by hotel owners, right? So there are fewer maid services, there are fewer restaurant employees. And so who bears the burden of this tax? I mean, somebody paid it, of course, but the burden could be local employers, right? Employees. It could be local suppliers, right? People who package soap for hotels. I mean, there are fewer rooms being rented. We need fewer bars of soap. And so what we talk about in our chapter is that incidence of these taxes. It's very difficult to actually measure. It's easier to kind of theoretical about this, but what we are worried about is that the incidence of these taxes don't fall on the people that are advertised. Take a car rental tax. Charlotte might not be a great example, but in Arlington, Texas, they put a car rental tax. But in Arlington, most of the cars that are being rented are by locals. The main car rental place would be at the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, which is not in Arlington, Texas. So somebody has their car under repair and they need to rent a car for a week or a few days. That's a local that's renting the car. So the car rental tax was advertised as being only forced on the outsider. The person comes in and is a tourist and then is going to pay the tax. But it could be that the locals are paying the tax. Could be the same thing with the hotel situation. Like, so you have a family reunion, so all your family's coming in. So are those those the outsiders you wanted to tax? You really wanted to tax the person that was coming in for the Panthers game or for a baseball game, and instead we're kind of imposing these taxes on individuals who we weren't really advertised as bearing the incident. So that's really the discussion we come up with, is that we could choose some amount of public money to pay for the stadiums, and then the question is, how do we go about doing that in a way that's transparent, but also puts the burden of the cost on those who are receiving the benefits of this. And so that's the second part of our chapter talks about if we're going to finance a stadium, who should actually pay for it? And again, kind of think about it commonsensically, like maybe the people that are getting a lot of benefit from that stadium should pay for it. So that might be the fans that go and visit the stadium, go to the games. Maybe they should pay a tax on the tickets, or they should pay personal seat licenses to finance the stadium, as opposed to shoving it on people that maybe couldn't afford to go to the games. Or frankly, if you don't like football or you don't like the sport that's being played in that stadium, why are you being forced to pay for it? So that's kind of the story in our chapter. Yeah.
We are chatting with Dr. Craig Depken, professor of economics at UNC-Charlotte, and as I listened to you discussing how this tax was playing out, I thought of the common term we hear in economics of the law of unintended consequences, that you think you're targeting one group, you actually end up hurting a whole nother group, including the people who tend to get hurt more by taxation.
Very much. And in our story, in our chapter, we talk about tax incidence. It's typically talked about between buyers and sellers. So there's a sales tax on some particular good. Who's going to bear the brunt of that tax? Is it the buyer or the seller? And what we're trying to get at is that it's actually much more nuanced than that, because there's lots of dimensions in which people could be bearing costs of a tax or any other policy. So it could be that there's a sales tax locally. I have a car, so I can try to drive away from that tax. I could go to the next county over and buy my goods and services at another county where I don't pay that tax. But if I don't have a car, then I can't avoid this. Maybe it could be a wealth issue, that is rich versus poor, but it could be time of purchase. I have to buy this today because I have an emergency, but somebody else is buying 6 months from now, so they have plenty of opportunity to find a substitute. So tax incidence typically, like, and again, principles of microeconomics course would be talked in a very simplistic way, but we're trying to be more nuanced and say that, just as you were saying, that the tax that you're imposing on one group of people could actually be borne by another group of people that you didn't see coming. And Frederick Bastiat, famously said, "There's a seen in the unseen." And so, seeing who pays the tax. So, okay, pay a tax at the hotel. I get it. There's a credit card swipe. That person paid the tax in dollar terms, but we don't know who actually bears the cost. And that's a little, again, a more nuanced question, and one that, especially when we talk about the stadium finances, because the numbers are so large. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars spread over 30 years, that these effects are not small and they're not temporary. They can be around for quite some time.